webinar on demystifying the ArcGIS online sign-in options. I'm John Osborne, and I work as a solution architect for the tech strategy team at Esri Canada. With me today is Mike Rogotsky, who works as a team lead with our technology adoption team. Now, for those of you who haven't attended one of our webinars before, the session's being recorded, and a link to both the recording and slides will be emailed to you after the webinar. If you do have any follow-up questions about the session, feel free to contact me or contact Mike or myself. Now, if you do have any questions about the content we're presenting, please use the Q&A panel. Be sure to choose Ask All Participants, then type your question in the box and click Send. Mike and I will be taking your questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to type your questions in at any time. Now, in today's session, we're going to look at different authentication options available with ArcGIS Online and how they're configured. We will then review how the Security Assertion Markup Language, or SAML, will allow you to use your own internal logins with ArcGIS Online. As you will see in this presentation, SAML provides the backbone for building centrally managed single sign-on experience. And finally, we'll bring it all together by demonstrating how you can configure ArcGIS Online to use SAML logins. Let's start by passing everything over to Mike for a quick poll.
Yeah, thanks, John, and nice to hear everybody here today. Let's open up that poll like John suggested, because we'd like to get a little information from you. We'd like to know here, what sign-in option does your organization use for access to ArcGIS Online? Is it ArcGIS logins, social logins, SAML logins, or OpenID Connect logins? So there are many choices available here for you when you're going to connect ArcGIS Online. And this will just give us an understanding of what you know so far. We are going to talk about all four of them in the context of the presentation. And we will concentrate pretty much the second half of the presentation on the SAML logins, like John had said. We'll also go through a demonstration of the setting up a social login as well to give you some introduction to that. So let's open up the poll. Let's show you the results. That'll be kind of good. So you should see now in the poll results that the majority of you are using ArcGIS logins, which is great. That's the default login. Some of you are using SAML logins, which is fantastic, because that will show you what you can do with SAML logins if you've already started working with it, and if you haven't, sort of what you can do to get there as well with the social logins and so on. So to keep going here, let's talk about the different authentication options that are available in ArcGIS Online. So whenever I start to work with something new, I like to think about something that I already know. And as we were preparing for this presentation, I was thinking about how ArcGIS Online signing in is kind of similar to the lock on my front door. So this is actually a picture of my lock on my front door. And I'm going to go on vacation this summer, and I want John to come over and take out my garbage and water my plants, and I need to let John get into my house. So with the lock that I actually have three options. I can give John a key, and he can use the key to turn the lock and get in. I can give him a code to the keypad, or I could give him an app even, and he could log in through the app and unlock the door there. So all three of those methods will get John inside my house to water my plants, take out my garbage, and the end result for him is going to be the same no matter which method he uses. So kind of like ArcGIS Online and signing in here today, the end result is we want to give people access into the organization and have them to be able to do their job. The method that we set up, there'll be benefits to the different methods, simplicities, or more challenges in setting them up, but each of them will provide access into the organization. So as we talk about the user management, it's important that we talk about we talk about the different ways of logging, and it's important to talk about user management and authentication here, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is managing users. Depending on the methods that we use, we could be pre-creating users, or we could be allowing the users to auto-join in the organization. And whatever types of users we are working with, we're going to be allowing, whereas the administrators is going to allow us to manage their license, determine the roles and privileges they're going to have. So whatever that we're using today, whatever authentication method, these are points we want to just keep in the back of our mind. Where we'll do a lot of this work in ArcGIS Online is in the security organization settings, but we'll also discuss member roles, credit allocation is, and what default you can give your users to be successful when they log in initially. Now, let's go through each of those options that we talked about here at the beginning in our poll there, just to give a level set of what we have. So all of you are using, or many of you are using ArcGIS accounts, and that's fantastic. That's the default ArcGIS Online method. It's all managed within the ArcGIS Online system. If you have logged into ArcGIS Online before, you probably used an ArcGIS account. The benefits are simple in the fact that it's simple to use. We're just integrating with the one system, ArcGIS Online, and we also have to consider the ways that we invite the users. We can add a user one at a time, or we can invite them in bulk. We have control of the password policy as well. Do we want certain characters involved, lengths, expiration date, times, and so on for passwords. And multi-factor authentication is something additionally that we can turn on, where we would require an additional sign-in option for those users. Now, the social logins are what we're going to talk about next, and I'll show how we do set these up. None of you are using them, but it's an interesting method that you could use to allow your users to sign in using a social network like we see here, Google, Facebook, GitHub, or Apple. The benefits to doing this are, as an administrator, it does provide you another method of creating accounts for your users. But we don't have, we also don't have the, so it has flexibility in creating accounts, but for our users, that's what I'm trying to get here, they don't have to create an additional login. They just need to sign in with a social network login that they already are using. So there's some familiarity in this across other platforms. And for instance, if you have a, for instance, I have a Kobo that I like to use for my, a Kobo that I like to have for e-reading. I actually use a Facebook account to sign in there. I didn't go and create a Kobo account for that. I just sign in using Facebook. So I don't have that additional step of creating another account. Their users have that familiarity in using that. Let's move on to the next one here. And let's talk about the authentication options here. With the where we're going to spend a lot of our time is the SAML options. And this is where we use our own identity provider, specifically a system that you use in your company to sign into another system, perhaps signing in through your own laptop, or as well signing into another system that your organization uses. So this is ArcGIS Online is compliant with SAML 2.0, and it'll integrate with any identity provider that supports SAML 2.0 as well. G Suite's listed here. There's other ones listed in the help. We're going to use Azure Active Directory in the demonstrations we do later on. The benefits here, kind of like the social logins, there's no additional login that's needed. There's no additional login which is needed. This is where that single sign-on that comes into play that John had mentioned. So for that user, they're comfortable with using a username and password that they've already used in another system in your organization. As the administrator, you're going to be comfortable with this because this is managed by another system that you don't have to be concerned about managing the user's names, passwords, and so on. So it decreases basically your overhead, it decreases your risk. It makes it easy if someone leaves your organization, then they will not be able to log into ArcGIS Online if their privileges are revoked by the identity provider. So in your organization, you are probably you may be the person who manages ArcGIS Online as an administrator, but you're probably not that person who manages that identity provider. So you're going to work with the other staff in your company more than likely to manage that. And we're going to do that in the demonstration later on, where I'll play the role of the ArcGIS Online administrator. John will play the role of that of the identity provider manager. There's a couple options as well where we can auto join and we can use enterprise groups. We'll talk about that later on and show that in a demonstration. The last one that I want to show or talk about here is the OpenID Connect logins. This is relatively new. We won't spend too much time on it, but it's a sense that you get to use your own identity provider as well. And it's doing that through the course of a simple identity layer that sits on top of an OAuth 2.0 protocol, like Okta in this case. So similar benefits to SAML. There are no additional logins that your users have to manage. It's managed by the IDP as well. In the example here, talking about Okta, and it has an auto join option as well. Okay, so bit of an introduction to the different authentication options in ArcGIS Online. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into a demonstration here. We're going to take a look at a few points about what we just talked about there. So the ArcGIS Online homepage that you come to by default, when we sign in, we're going to see that we have several options here. We can sign in with an ArcGIS login. It seems many of you are familiar with that. You can, I'm not going to do that. You could provide your organizations, your ArcGIS organization's URL. So if you were using SAML or if you were using OpenID Connect, you would provide the URL preface here to your organization and then be able to continue along. And the social logins are set up accordingly as well if your organization is allowing that. Now, we're going to work at this organization here for most of the day today, this fictitious town of JDO. And we're going to log in and sort of see what's going on here. Now, as I log in, I only have the ArcGIS login. So we haven't enabled anything like social logins, SAML logins in this organization. So we'll sign in, and I'm going to be an administrator in the organization. When I go into the organization, what are we going to see here? Well, let's check out the members. And we see that we have a total of 7 members. Now, I knew by logging in, they were all ArcGIS users. One quick thing that you can do is check the login type, and it'll tell you if you are using other users that you have enabled other login options for. It'll be listed here. We'll be able to see that. Now, for the first demonstration, let me show you some of the settings here, and we'll allow a social login to be used in the organization. So as we do this, we're going to want to spend some time in the security. We're going to spend some time in the logins, and we want to turn on here social logins. So I have the social logins turned on, but I haven't specified which of the social networks we'd like to use. So I'll check Facebook in this case. So that's been set and would be allowed to use if a person has signed in previously with a Facebook login. So I'll sign out just to show you what will happen here. And I'll sign back in. And we can see I've got the Facebook icon available to me down here as a method to log in. To use this, I'm going to invite a user to sign into the organization using the protocol of their choice. So the only other protocol I have enabled other than ArcGIS is through the social network Facebook. So what I can do to enable this, or to allow a user to do that, is I'll go to the section where we invite the users. So we'll invite members. You probably use one of the first 2 methods here. These are sort of the default 2, but we'll invite members to join using an account of their choice, and we'll allow them to use a social login as well. So I need to pick the new member. I'll put in their email address. So this is a colleague, Ruth Casper, and I'll accept the defaults here. I'll get into the defaults that we're using in the next section. But you'll see here, as we go through, I basically formulate a way that I'm sending her an invitation to this organization. So when I come back, I have one pending member organizational invitation. And if I go out now, let's go out to this section here. I'm in Ruth Casper's Gmail address account here, so we can see that Ruth Casper 01 at Gmail, just a pseudo person that I've created for the demonstration. She sees that she has an ArcGIS notification, and she has to click the link to join the organization, so the town of JDO. So when she clicks this, a few things are going to happen here. She's going to get the option here to create a new account because we've given her the option to create the account as she goes in. Now, the 2 options that we have available in our organization are Facebook and ArcGIS. So if we pick Facebook, what will happen here is that Ruth will be challenged now for her Facebook login that's tied to her account. So I can log in, or tied to her Facebook account essentially. So she'll log in through here. And when we go in now, it's creating a username in ArcGIS. So it does create a user in the ArcGIS system, but it's based on authenticating through the social network Facebook. And as we click through now, we'll see now that Ruth is a member of the organization. We get a little icon here for Ruth to see that she's using her Facebook authentication as her method to come in. And we'll see as well that she is now a member of the full-on organization here with the privileges that we would have given her for this. Now, if I go back, I wouldn't mind checking out as my administrative user that I was using to invite her, had the pending member. If I refresh, we'll quickly see that we have an 8th additional user, Ruth Casper. It's created the ArcGIS account, which is authenticated through Facebook, and we'll see the login type is social. So that is a quick look at just the invitation process, where some of the settings are. I think this is a good point here to, we'll stop sharing and just go over to John to see if we have any questions that are any of you have asked. So John, any questions there to answer?
Sure. Let's see. What is Mike's code on his door?
Oh, John, you're
well,
not going to be you're not going to be coming over to take care of things on my vacation if you're going to be doing that.
So folks, when he does ask me to help, I'll make sure to add that to my Reddit account. But no, kidding aside, I got a question here. Groups are one of the most interesting sections in AGL security. You're right. How do you use groups to share items from different organizations? And we do actually have a lot of help online about how you can do group to group and inter-organizational sharing. The idea, quite simply, is you can invite another user who is a part of their own ArcGIS Online organization to a group within your own organization. And then as you share stuff in that group, that user in the other organization will see that. And in fact, Mike and I also do some other webinars regarding distributed collaboration. And this is actually one of the initial topics we talk about as really the first place to start when you're dealing with collaboration. Just another question here. Can you use the same social login account, your Facebook account, for example, in multiple ArcGIS Online organizations? So let's say you want to actually use Facebook for other organizations. And a place where Facebook is often used is in like hub style applications that definitely call for citizen science and things like that. But in this case, yes, you can. You can use the same social login for multiple organizations. ArcGIS Online will present an option to you to pick the organization you want to sign in. And so another question, just one more here. When using social to connect, what data about you are those apps collecting? For us, we obviously need the principal name, which is your username, because that will get added to the user. And I do talk about this a little later. We will request the email. If that comes in, then we use it. Otherwise, the user can update their own profile. And we ask for your given names, your first name and your last name. We do not request any other information. And of course, if it's not provided to us by Facebook, or if that's then we just leave those parts of the profile empty. The only thing we really need, of course, is the principal name to know that you're coming in from Facebook. So that's it for now. I'm going to pass this back to Mike to continue.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I do want to show one more thing here before we jump into the next slide section. Essentially, we're going to start getting into SAML. That'll be sort of the main part of the organization, the presentation. And we're going to go through ArcGIS Online defaults as well for setting up your new users. Now, what I do want to show here as we go in is this organization here that we actually are using at Esri Canada through our SAML, through a SAML login, where we use an internal system at Esri Canada, in fact, our Azure Active Directory, to authenticate ourselves into ArcGIS Online. So as we see here, I've only got one option that we would use here to log into this organization, and it's essentially my same login that I used to log into my laptop, the same login that I access my Office 365 information. You'll see that some information has popped up here. Different items are available to me to use as an Esri Canada staff member in this organization. So this is just sort of a little proof of the fact that this SAML login is really handy for us to use across Esri Canada as well for sharing information internally. All our staff, they just sign into this with their own accounts that they've used, like I mentioned, signing into a laptop, signing into Office 365 account, and then we can share and collaborate very easily with them. It's been a very successful system for us to use in that context. So when we do allow the users into the system, we do want to make sure that they are successful at the start. So we want to go through an ArcGIS Online checklist here of before we get things started with our users and what we want to be aware of. So when we get our ArcGIS Online environment ready, we want to consider things like roles. So roles provide privileges based on different role types. So there are 5 default roles that are provided with ArcGIS Online, everything from an administrator to a viewer, and likely most of the functionality is going to be available to you within the one of those roles that you need. But you can create custom roles for specific functionality. In the case of the screenshot here, we have a user administrator, which has some of the administrative privileges, but not all of them, just privileges to create users, as a matter of fact. So that's something that's worth checking out as well when you're getting set up. Credit allocation is also important. We can provide users the ability to run processes like geocodes and enrichment that will consume credits, and this is a great way to take advantage of the system. If you have some hesitancy or concerns, you could have roles that are defined that don't allow users to use credits. But if you are using allowing users to have credits, you can have some credit budgeting. So within our Esri Canada organization, just a few days ago, John was doing some very large geocodes where he had to geocode many points, and he was hitting his credit budget, which is fantastic. We just increased it for him based on what he was doing. Now, the new member defaults are where we'll set up the roles, the types, any licenses that when a user first signs in initially, that they're going to be provided an initial set of privileges. You can change these depending after the users are logged in, but it's nice to give them sort of a running start. This will include, as I mentioned, the type and role that they're part of, any additional licenses, perhaps to ArcGIS Pro. We can assign them to different groups that they might be contributing to, set the credit budgeting, and set up Esri Access as well so that they can sign in to the training courses, get communications through the different methods of communicating with Esri too. So let's just take a look at setting up some ArcGIS Online checklist settings here in this next demonstration. So I'm going to go back to my screen. We're going to go over to our GeoJDO organization, and we're going to go into the settings this time, or again. And here we'll take a look at the member roles. So here's the same information we had on the screenshot with the different types of roles that we have. We can create roles that essentially are selected from an existing role, different templates that are in the system that we can start working with. But we can also see here that we can start to cherry pick our own roles that we might want to add or remove for those specific bits of functionality. One thing we found when defining the member roles for your default member, it's always nicer to give someone maybe just a little less privilege than they need than you think they might need, than giving them more than you think they might need. What we found is if you give people a lot more functionality and then realize, oh, maybe we should take this back a little bit, you'll get a little more resistance than if someone's asking for, hey, I'm trying to do this, I can't do it, I don't think I have the right privilege. If you provide them that privilege, it's generally a little bit easier conversation to have with your users. Credit allocation can be turned on here, which we've done for this organization. So that can come into play in our new member defaults when we set things up. So for our member roles that we're going to be inviting into our organization, and we're going to use this for our next user that we invite, it'll be our SAML user, our SAML authentication. So we're going to provide some creator and publisher so that people will be able to create and publish content. We'll set up some add-on licenses. We figure they're going to be using ArcGIS Pro. We'll start them off with basic. We're going to invite them to specific groups to join. This will be the base maps. We're going to drop the credit budget down. We had it a little higher, but we want to be a little safer on this side. And we'll enable Esri Access. So we've basically set up some member roles, some member defaults that we'll use when we go in and invite our users into the organization. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to John now, and he's going to continue on and really get into the meat of the second part of the presentation with the SAML authentication. John?
Thanks, Mike. Okay. All right, well, the Security Assertion Markup Language, or SAML, is an open standard that supports web single sign-on by defining a way for different applications to exchange authentication and authorization information. So what does that actually mean? Well, when you use ArcGIS logins, the entire login process is managed by ArcGIS Online. This includes the sign-in page, token generation, and all the pieces that are needed to manage the user's profile. However, when you configure SAML logins, similar to the social logins, ArcGIS now is passing the responsibility of authenticating a user to a third-party identity provider. And in fact, the same is true for social logins, the same is true for OpenID Connect, and in this particular case, with SAML authentication, which has been the more common means of people integrating their own internal enterprise or organizational usernames and passwords or credentials. Now, this works because an explicit trust has been configured between these two environments. What you're going to see in one of our upcoming demonstrations is how this trust is configured through metadata, and each environment must provide to each other. And you're going to see us pass some back and forth. And it includes information like certificates that allow us to identify ourselves to the other party. And it allows us to encrypt certain information using, again, trusted certificates that we've passed back and forth and that only the two environments share or know about. Now, once this trust is configured, ArcGIS Online becomes a service provider that can support Web SSO with other applications configured to trust the same identity provider. So what that means is I can log in once and use multiple web-based applications that are all configured as service providers for that same identity provider. Each have had to go through that configuration step to set up that trust, and now each can actually share the token and SAML artifact information that we're going to talk about shortly between each other, again, because that trust was created, because they know that they are allowed to talk to each other or share with each other. Now, how does this work in practice? Well, it first starts by the process starts when the user attempts to log into ArcGIS Online. Now, if they choose to log in using their SAML login, like you saw with Mike choosing to log in with Facebook, but again, now this will be with SAML logins, ArcGIS Online creates a SAML request and has the browser redirect this request to the identity provider. And the SAML request just contains some information about, hey, I'm ArcGIS Online. Hey, here's information to prove I am who I say I am. And I want you, the browser, to pass this to the identity provider that I am going to give you the URL to, because I've already configured that trust. Please log in. So the browser redirects that request to the identity provider, and the identity provider looks at that request and says, okay, I see there's information in here. I've already configured a trust with whoever sent this SAML request. Looks like it's ArcGIS Online because of the information I've been given. I have a certificate that allows me to unencrypt some of the information that is included within that request. So I'm good to go to trust this person. So if it is indeed, if the identity provider decides, okay, there's a trust, and it knows it was sent by a trusted provider, it's going to prompt that user for credentials, again, using its own sign-in page. What's important here is that these credentials are never passed to ArcGIS Online. They only go between the client and the identity provider. So ArcGIS Online will never know the username, they'll never know the password for this particular user. Of course, they will get information about the principal name or the username, information that allows ArcGIS Online to identify who's connecting, but there isn't really very much else that's going to be provided. Now, if the user provides valid credentials, the identity provider prepares a SAML response. Now, again, this response is going to contain information about the identity provider for ArcGIS Online so that ArcGIS Online can validate that it came from the identity of provider it assumes it came from. So that again includes the fact that we're going to encrypt that response using a certificate that we've provided to ArcGIS Online, and it will use that to do some of its decryptions. And you're going to see us set these up within our demonstration. But the key here is that the response will contain an assertion. And a SAML assertion is basically encrypted XML text that contains information about the authenticated user. And this allows ArcGIS Online to make decisions regarding their ability to connect. It also contains additional information that ArcGIS Online can use to configure the profile and define group membership. And we're going to look a little bit into that as we continue with our demonstrations. Now, the browser is going to redirect that SAML response to ArcGIS Online. Sorry. And ArcGIS Online is going to read it, check, make sure it came from a trusted identity provider. It will also do checks to make sure that this user is actually allowed to log into ArcGIS Online. And in fact, we can set that up in 2 different locations. And you're going to see us set it up so that ArcGIS Online says, if the identity provider says they're good, I say they're good. But there are a bunch of configurations I can do. I can configure stuff within the identity provider to allow who to connect. Or I can actually go even further and go into ArcGIS Online and say, not only do you have to be trusted by the identity provider, you have to be invited by me. So there are a lot of different checks that we can do. And of course, we can even go further and include things like, multi-factor and a whole bunch of different mechanisms that allow us to add more and more layers on top of the security components we have here, while still giving us the flexibility of single sign-on. Now, if they are allowed, they're logged in and they're good to go. So in a few minutes, Mike and I are going to sort of demonstrate this process using Azure Active Directory. But obviously, we support SAML2 providers. So you could actually use other providers out there, whether it's an on-premise based provider or a cloud-based provider. There's a number of them out there, and we've already mentioned ones like Okta, and we've mentioned ones like Azure Active Directory, but ADFS. There's several different providers out there that we can integrate with. So let's take a look at some of the steps that actually matter, regardless of what it is we're doing, and regardless of which particular identity provider we choose to authenticate our users. So the first step in this process will require you to register ArcGIS Online as a service provider to your identity provider. Now, this step prepares the necessary certificates and metadata that ArcGIS Online needs to validate the source of that SAML response. And of course, we're also going to pass the same back from ArcGIS Online to the identity provider so that the identity provider can trust that the SAML request came from a properly configured and trusted service provider. Now, once you register your service provider, so we've gone through the steps of, setting up our metadata for our identity provider, passed it to ArcGIS Online. ArcGIS Online is going to pass back some information to say, yes, here's how you validate who I am. Now we need to configure what information are we willing to send from our identity provider to ArcGIS Online. And this is basically the contents of your SAML artifact. And a lot of this information is going to be the basis for things like the user profile information that we use to initially generate a profile for a user when they first log in. That includes email address and given name, name, surname. We will also include the principal name, which is essentially the username, so that ArcGIS Online can identify, that this is it'll actually be the specific username as at least they're identified within the identity provider. Whether it's the same name or not depends on how you configure it to your identity provider, but there will be sort of it's called a principal name that is basically the username for the credentials. And we may also include information about groups. The groups themselves will be groups within the IDP that I could be a member of, and we can use that information to to configure group membership within ArcGIS Online, and we're gonna take a look at that in a few slides after our next demonstration. Now I'm going to need to grant that particular user access to the application, and as we've said before, that could be done in the IDP, that could be done in ArcGIS Online, that could be done in both. So we're going to take a look here. You've already taken a look at Mike doing an example of where we are allowing our user in ArcGIS Online by inviting that member to be in our group. The next here is that we're going to take a look at how we do that for us in Azure Active Directory. And finally, the key step of federating everything all together so that we've completed all of the steps and have shared all of the metadata necessary to make sure that the two environments truly trust each other. I mean, this really isn't as simple as just passing around URLs. There are a whole bunch of information that needs to be added and included to make sure that the identity provider trusts the service provider and that the service provider trusts the identity provider, because it really needs to be a trust from both sources. Because, you know, I don't want to redirect somebody to some random URL to log in, and then, you know, I'm redirecting them to something that might not actually be a safe location. And the same with the identity provider. I don't want to allow them to just log in anywhere that I don't allow them or grant them access to. So really this is, and you're going to see this in the next demonstration, that this is not just something you just flip on lightly. You actually have to do a little bit of work to make sure that trust is there. So why don't we actually just get into this demonstration? I think, Mike, if you're ready to go, you're going to see us go back and forth here, because what's going to happen is I am going to act as our Azure Active Directory administrator and Mike as our ArcGIS Online administrator. And we're going to go through a careful process of ensuring that we've passed the metadata back and forth, that we've set up the valid trusts between the two different environments, and that we've configured secure messaging between the two environments so that we can create, and in the end, if it all works, cross our fingers, we'll be able to connect using these accounts that we've created in ArcGIS Online. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and just going to jump right into a screen over here. So I'm just going to start by sharing I'm logged in here into Azure Active Directory. And right now I've logged into my GeoJDO organization. Now this particular organization contains a number of users that I would like to provide the ability to log into ArcGIS Online. And Mike and I have sat down and worked together to figure this out. And now we have to complete the process to do all of our work. So what I'm going to do, and what's nice with Azure, and it's for what we're using here, and this is true for some other environments too, but Azure actually has a wizard that was already built for both ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise that allows me to create this sort of, do the initial steps for creating this SAML, setting up a SAML logins for ArcGIS Online. So it's actually really neat. I'm going to click on New Applications. I am going to just type in ArcGIS, and if I'm lucky, I should actually see that I have a couple of options. I'm actually going to use ArcGIS Online for this test. Now I can just come in here, type in a name, click Create. It takes about a minute, and I don't want to have you guys wait for that. I don't want to have everybody wait for that. So I've set this up just before we started this session so that we don't have to wait too long to get going. But as soon as that Create button is done, this is the page that it shows up for me. And as you can see here, it gives me a bunch of steps that I need to do to set up SAML logins for ArcGIS Online. The two that we're really going to focus on today is to assign users and groups, and the second being set up single sign-on. The other three provides more advanced components that we can look at other times, but for now we're really just interested in getting this sign-on set up. So I'm just going to click Get Started here. And for us, we're going to use a SAML-based single sign-on method. And as you can see here, I have a lot of information that was already filled out for me. The key part to this step right now is that I need a URL that contains a pointer to metadata that Mike is going to use. I also need to I also need the certificates that metadata is going to give to Mike to say, I am a trusted source. And here are those certificates. Of course, I'm going to need some more metadata from Mike in a moment, but now we're going to just pass it over to you, Mike, and we're going to let you take it from here.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, John. So I'm in my town of GeoJDO again. I've got to go into my organizational settings because we want to turn on the SAML authentication and then provide access into our Azure Active Directory that John has been setting up. So I'm in my security section, and I'm going to set up now a new SAML login. We're using one identity provider, the Azure Active Directory, and now I need to fill out a little bit of information here. So this part here for the organization, and this is what actually appears on the button when the user is going to log in. So you probably want to give something a little, makes a little sense here, geojdo.ca credentials. Now, I'm going to allow the users to automatically sign in. This is nice because once John has provided the ability of those users to be authenticated through Azure Active Directory, they're set up there. By just coming into ArcGIS Online, they will then be able to sign into ArcGIS Online. I don't need to send an invitation to the individual users in this case. I've copied the file, or I've copied that URL already from John off screen. John had sent it to me in a little chat, and I've just put that in there. So what I want to do now is just going to hit enter on that. I'm going to save my settings. And once I do that, if I go back in, I can download some service provider metadata. So John had indicated he's going to need some information from me now about what is available from what's the settings in the ArcGIS Online environment that we're working with. So I'm going to save this XML file into a shared folder that John and I are using. I'll save that. It'll go over to John. And what I'll do is I'll stop sharing at this point, and then John can go in and continue making the configurations in the Azure Active Directory. John?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to go back. In a second, I will share. All right. So let's go back to sharing my Azure environment again. And I can actually see that that file has actually been uploaded for me. I'm just going to copy it so that it is local machine. I'm just doing this off to the side here. All right. So now that I'm back in Azure and Mike has set up that metadata file, it's just an XML file that contains, as I said before, some information about it's information about how ArcGIS Online is going to identify itself to me when it wants someone to log in. And as I said before, this will be things like certificates, the application name, and a few other details that allow me to definitely say, okay, yeah, this is from ArcGIS Online. Let's provide Let's provide a login page for my user. So here we are back in our Azure Active Directory environment, and I'm going to select Upload Metadata File. And what's nice here is that I can take that file that Mike just sent to me and upload it into for us on our shared drive here. I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to click Add. And what's nice for me is it's filled up a lot of the information that I don't need to worry about anymore. For example, this information, this entity ID is going to be what Mike passes to me in his SAML request so that I know, hey, this is coming from ArcGIS Online. Here is some additional information around, well, what if I actually want to launch the login page to ArcGIS Online from my SAML IDP environment? I might want to create a central splash page or a central dashboard that allows people to just click on an application, and then it actually makes and sends the login request from the IDP as opposed to the service provider routing to my IDP. So there's a lot of ways. That's actually called identity provider login. That's called identity provider logins as opposed to service provider logins. So for this, I just need to also fill in just a little bit of information down here. I'm going to select paste, and I should be good to go. I'm going to select save. And what I'm hoping to see after this is done is that it's going to fill out all of this required information here that I need to make this work. So now I'm done for another moment, and we're going to go back to Mike again, and you're going to show us the next step.
Yeah, for sure, John. So I'm going to be the next one up here. And let me get back into my ArcGIS Online environment. And what I need to do is I need to basically refresh those settings in the SAML configuration that I've done here so that we take into account those new settings that John has. So I'll go back over and I'll refresh that URL, hit enter again. I'll save it. I'll go back in, and we have the different properties now that John, that we're going to be using here within the connection to the Azure Active Directory. I'm going to want to set up some advanced settings. John had mentioned this in the slides a bit to provide some additional security settings here. So I'm going to enable the encrypt assertion because this tells Azure that ArcGIS Online supports encrypted responses. So Azure will encrypt the assertion section of the SAML response. I'm going to enable a sign request. So this tells ArcGIS Online to sign the authentication request to Azure. I'm going to sign in using SHA-256. This is essentially a stronger encryption protocol. And I'm going to propagate the logout to the identity provider as well. So when we sign out of ArcGIS Online, we're also signing out of the Azure environment on the back end. In order to do that, I need the logout URL. And in our case with Azure, the login URL is the same as the logout URL. So that is nothing that we need to trouble ourselves with finding. I'll put this in here, commit that change. See that we have all our settings set that we have. We're not going to be using group membership in this case. But at this point here, I need to just make the saves to those changes. Now, for the remainder, we need to give the users access. So I'm going to turn things back over to John, because since it's SAML authentication, John is going to take care of that in the Azure environment. Then we'll come back to me to see how the logins work.
It's a good thing we work well together, Mike.
Well, that's what makes good teamwork here. You know, we have the ArcGIS Online administrator with the Azure Active Directory administrator.
So we're in our final stages. I have to add some users. I have to give users the privilege to use this particular service provider. Before I just jump in and show you that in ArcGIS in Azure Active Directory, what I want you to do is take a quick look at area number 2 here. Area number 2, this is where I define what goes into that SAML artifact and the type of information that will get passed to ArcGIS Online. So what I put in here, this is information that gets passed to ArcGIS Online. So information about the user's name and email address. The principal name is the username as typed in by that user. And I'm also going to send, though we're not leveraging it at the moment, I'm also going to send information about the groups in my IDP that user is a member of, because later that could be leveraged for enterprise groups on the ArcGIS Online side, which we'll talk about shortly. I don't believe we'll demonstrate today. So all I have to do now, just to finish this off, is I'm going to add some users to this particular, I'm going to add some users. In this case, I'm going to add a couple of the GeoJDO users I have, myself, Mike, and one of our analysts, Shannon. I'm going to click select. I'm going to click assign. Now I could also use roles here, and this would be where I would be working with enterprise groups, but I'm not going to really do that right now. I'm just going to leave the default access. And I think we should be good to go, Mike. I think I want to see you try to log in.
Okay, that sounds good. So I'll just take control back from you there, John, and we'll go back to my screen. So what I want to do here is go back to the ArcGIS Online login screen. So I've logged out, and now I want to log back in. So when I sign in, not log back in, but I want to sign in with one of those geojdo.ca credential users. So I've got the option now to sign in using one of their usernames. So I need to provide here the geojdo.ca username. That was that M. Grogotsky one that John had picked out. I have to enter the password, which I have saved in memory, and I'll stay signed in. So when we do this, we're going to see that the user comes in, and now I'm authenticated here as my geojdo.ca user. We can see here I'm part of the organization. Note the username. This gets picked up from the Azure Active Directory. So the email address tied in with the the part of the URL to the ArcGIS Online organization, we can see the groups that I'm part of as part of the settings that we set up in our default member roles, our default settings. We'll even see that I've got that ArcGIS Pro license. I can download it from here. I'm a creator, publisher. I have 500 credits, which I can start working with. And I'm basically a member of the organization. So John, this has worked out quite well for us. Let's take a look here in the administrative look that I had previously in ArcGIS Online. So we're back as my my M. Grogotsky administrator user now. When we look at our members, we see that we have this M. Grogotsky GeoJDO.ca user, and we can look at the login types. We have SAML types available to us as well. So as John said, it's a good thing we work well together. We've been able to get this organized and working in our organization, making things earlier for the workers of GeoJDO. So John, why don't I turn it back over to you, and you can take us home with a little more information to end things off.
Sure. Okay, well, let's take this thing home. The final topic we want to discuss here is enterprise groups. Now, enterprise groups allow you to link membership to ArcGIS Online groups using groups configured within your IDP. Now, this allows you to centrally manage group membership within your third-party identity provider while using ArcGIS Online to share content. So what's nice as well about this is you add those users into a group within your IDP that's going to get propagated into ArcGIS Online. If you remove that user from your IDP, they are going to be removed from those groups in ArcGIS Online. So it gives you that nice central control. So to enable this, you enable that SAML group membership option in the panel that Mike had showed during our demonstration when you initially configure that trust. But you can change this at a later time. This is not something you have to do immediately. You can do this at a later date if you choose to set it up. But yeah, I mean, it's in the same section of the settings. Now, to make this work, you need to include information about the IDP groups within that SAML artifact. And I sort of showed you that a little bit in my demonstration as well. ArcGIS Online looks for one or more particular attributes within the artifact to define group membership. And there's a few listed right there. There's going to be the group or groups attribute, the roles attribute, the member of attribute, or the member dash of attribute. And here's what this kind of looks like. So down here, what you'll see is a SAML response. The attribute itself, in this case, is named groups, but that could have been group, member of, role, a number of them. ArcGIS Online looks for any one of those attribute names. Now, to link an IDP group to a group in ArcGIS Online, first you're going to need to be logged in as a SAML login that has an administrative role, because that will allow you to see this enterprise group name option when you create a brand new group. Now, and when a group is created, that option shows. And when you're asked for the enterprise group name, you want to make sure that you're using the text as it appears in the SAML artifact. And one way to troubleshoot this, again, when Mike had configured the encrypt some of the encryption settings, you could turn those off just temporarily if you had to troubleshoot some of the issues around what goes into the SAML token. And there are actually a bunch of plugins for Chrome and other browsers that allow you to inspect some of the SAML information going back and forth to allow you to troubleshoot this a lot better. In fact, that's how I generated that particular XML text. Now, if the enterprise group name is listed correctly, that user is going to be added to the group when they log in. If that group is not in that SAML response, that user will not be added to that group. And this is dynamic. This will happen as you log in. So if they log in and that group isn't seen, they're not going to be able to access that content. So in summary today, I mean, that wraps up pretty much everything we wanted to talk about today. We've looked at different authentication options available with ArcGIS Online. We then discussed the tasks you need to do to prepare online for SAML logins. And in fact, a lot of those tasks that Mike showed you are really things you should do for many or any of the login options, because you really do want to manage and properly control the access that a user has before they log in. I think Mike had said it earlier. It's better to be, to be tighter, to have a more locked down environment before you start, and then you decide to grant more privileges as needed, as opposed to giving them too many up front. Lastly, we just sort of brought it all together by setting up ArcGIS Online to use SAML logins and allow you to centrally manage these logins from an IDP like Azure Active Directory. Now, there's lots of blogs out there about this. There's other presentations out there. Some very good ones include the benefits of using enterprise logins for ArcGIS Online, using social logins for your organization, some ArcGIS Online help on setting up logins, and then there's the last video there on setting up organizational specific logins, and the links are in the slides, which will be posted after this presentation. I also don't want to leave you without thinking about some of the webinars and training that can help you understand this task further, but also help you understand other things about our platform. We have a few coming up around connecting geography and spreadsheets, Fast and Curious, the next generation of map viewers, and myself and my coworker Ali Kodab is going to be working on activating the community map of Canada using. It'll look at both not only the community map of Canada as well as some of the development that goes into making that work for you if indeed you are a developer and interested in leveraging some of the great work that our community maps team does here. There's a number of seminars coming up as well, and a bunch of good training courses that you can look at. But as always, Mike and I thank you for joining us. One of my favorite people to present with is Mike Rogotsky, so we always have fun with these things. And I think we're going to take some questions right now. Mike?
Whoops, yeah, let's do that, John.